Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Nathan Williams. I'm going to be facilitating this session. So just to check you are in the right session, you are in interactive session 2, which the title is behind me. How can transmission deliver secure, affordable and sustainable electricity in the future? Short and catchy, how we like it? Well, close. So today's session, you'll probably notice before we start, there is a camera off to your left, my right. He'll be centrally focused on this part of the stage. So fortunately for me, that means Stewart, not me. If anyone's got any objections or anything, please just note he is purely focused on the content, not on all of you. So that's how that's going to work today. So this session, it works quite simply. Stuart's going to present for a short-ish period of time. He's got a few slides to run through. We'll have a general Q&A when you can just throw some questions at Stewart, and Stewart will do his level best to answer them. And then we're going to run through 3 separate questions, which we'll dive into a bit more detail a little bit later on. For those 3 central questions, there'll be a PowerLink person, if there's not already, at every single table, who'll be scribing those answers furiously, so they'll be ready and stretched and prepared to go by the time that comes and have their writing hands at the ready. And then we'll do a quick recap and then move to the next question. But we'll address each question centrally. But don't worry, I'll come back to that before we go. Any questions before we dive in? Fantastic. Without further ado, Mr. Stewart Bell's going to run through a presentation. Stewart.
Excellent. Thank you, Nathan. I'll keep away from that speaker there. I don't have too much feedback. So, congratulations. You selected the best session. So, you've certainly made the best choice, and we'll have a cracking time over the next hour and a half. So to start off with, I'll give a little bit of context for the discussion, and then I really want to kind of hand over to you guys, because it's really the benefit and value from the session is to have the discussion from you guys. And one of the things we're kind of wrestling with at the moment is how do you find that right balance, that optimal mix between network, demand response, generation diversity, and some storage, and how do you actually bring all that together to give the best possible outcome for customers and consumers? So I'll be all ears in about 20-25 minutes. As we heard earlier this morning, so the NEM is transitioning. We've had a lot of change in the last 5 years with the introduction of solar rooftop. You can see some changes in the coal power stations, most recently in South Australia and in Victoria. We're seeing a lot of interest in large-scale renewables, and we expect that to continue certainly for the next couple of years. And then as the climate change policy is set for 2030, you'll see that going to then continue through to 2030. Other things we can see a little bit of storage. So whether that be pump storage, they're talking about the Snowy 2 scheme, but we're also seeing storage. And I say storage is coming. Well, storage is actually here now. You can buy storage to put behind the meter to go with your solar panels. And there's some pilot projects reasonably sized, up to 100 megawatts of batteries now being put onto our network. So all of a sudden storage is here, and we're certainly seeing that's going to be a continuing theme over the next 10 years. So there's an awful lot happening in the NEM space. And the trilemma, and it's not just an Australian thing, but this is being seen right across the world. How do you find and get that balance between sustainability, reliability and security of supply, and then cost? It's very easy to get 2 of the 3, but very, very hard to get the 3. And how do you find that optimal balance? And it's only through informed discussions such as the ones we're going to have here that we can actually then to tease that out. And that balance will actually change over time as well as technologies come and prices fall in different areas. So that balance will continue to evolve over the next 10 years. We've had a number of reviews in recent years. A key one was the Finkel review. It came out of COAG. So they got Alan Finkel to put together an expert, and then engaged with a whole raft of stakeholders to put together the blueprint for the national electricity market, and his report was finalised in June this year. Looking at the 4 areas, he was talking about increased security. So one of the challenges there was about, well, you're seeing our synchronous generators, and if they're have closed down, what's taking their place? So they're putting forward a recommendation that was to make sure that the synchronous generators that are on the network just now provide adequate notice of them turning down. So again, that's going to be a key part of that security part. Talk there about ensuring reliability, and they've put forward the need to have a national plan. So looking at not just on a state-based level, but right across the national electricity market. And the time frame for pulling that together is June next year. So we've already had discussions with AEMO and my counterparts and other TNSPs of how do we actually work together to achieve that national plan. So that if we get that right, then it'll feed into our future reliability. Talk there about rewarding customers, and a number of the reviews are putting the customer at the centre of this challenge that we've got, and how do we engage with the consumer to leverage off the new technologies with the existing systems we've got to get the right outcome. So certainly kind of rewarding customers. So if they demand response, for example, so all of a sudden we've traditionally had the generation follow the load, and whatever the load the customer was was wanting, that's what we met. All of a sudden you might turn that on its head and say, well, hang on, as generation becomes more intermittent, do we actually want to change the load accordingly? In order to do that, we've got to engage with the customer so they can see the value in doing that. And lower emissions. So again, it's on that trajectory of how do we meet the Paris Accord commitment we've already got, 28% reductions by 2030. And then what does that look like to 2050? And importantly, what does it look like from the energy industry? So are we actually going to do some heavy lifting for the rest of the economy? Which is quite possible. So there's how do we make sure we have that smooth transition and a common goal in that space? We've also had the Credible Pathways Review. So the Queensland Government put together an independent panel last year to look at options to reach 50% renewables in Queensland by 2030. And they looked at a number of ways of achieving that. One was looking at a linear path over the next 10 or so years. Saw one where they actually then ramped up with more activity in the latter years. The rationale behind that was that the renewable technologies will become more and more cost effective as time goes by. And you can see that in the solar space, and I've got a couple of graphs later on. We'll see how that's going to change in the storage space as well. So as costs come down, so you could do a little bit less now with expecting more of a ramp up in the latter years. And the grey line there is what happens if there was a national 45% target, which is a bit more than the 28% we've said through the Paris Accord. But if you want the electricity industry to do that heavy lifting, 45% might not be unreasonable. And if that was the case, where would Queensland land in that, and what additional would they have to do in order to achieve the 50% renewables in Queensland? So big body of work in that space. Queensland Government's response to that independent review was the Power in Queensland plan, and we heard Paul this morning talking about that. So they put together this Queensland Energy Security Task Force, and that's going to help to implement a number of those Finkel recommendations. They're also making sure that we're prepared for summer in the next couple of years. So as Paul said, there's a short, medium and long-term view. So very much focused on ensuring we have reliable supply in the next coming summer. And as part of that, they've actually brought back on Swanbank E to make sure we've got the appropriate capacity. And similarly, looking at that interconnection, so again, similar to the Finkel review, that grid plan. So they're saying, well, what is Queensland's role in that, and in particular interconnectors, whether it be to New South Wales or to South Australia, and make sure that we're participating with AEMO as part of that national plan. And in session number 1, which they'll be going in great detail about this, but it's like, how do you then facilitate the renewables? So is it a crescent or a clean energy hub or a renewable energy zone? But the concept's all the same about how do you connect all these renewables, but in the most cost-effective way. And similarly, they've got reverse auctioning and also, again, storage. So as I said, there's a number of initiatives working in this storage space. We've also got work that we've been doing with ENA and CSIRO. So over the last 2 years, been putting together a bit of a roadmap of what do we have to do from a network, both distribution and transmission perspective, over the next 10 years. So a significant body of work's been done the last couple of years in that space, and identified a number of things that we've got to do as an industry to move things forward. The final report of this came out in April, but we had a draft. It came out at the end of last year, and you can actually see a number of the recommendations in the ENTR report are actually been reflected in the Finkler report as well. So you're starting to get some commonality of what are the actions that need to take place. Again, the Energy Networks view had very much about having the customer at the centre, and then how do you then get the right reliability, the right sustainable outcomes at the right cost. And what we found through the modelling is if we do that well, there are significant savings to be had, billions and billions of dollars if we do that integration well. There you can see is those 3 reviews. There are a number of others, but over those 3 reviews, and then you say, well, what does that mean for transmission? So you start to pull it together and say, well, what are we going to do different? In the system security space, so I've been looking at things like inertia, system strength, generator standards. So what do we as transmission companies, how can we support that? So the inertia you need to make sure that we maintain the right frequency, the system strength, so how do you provide that so that with that voltage stability that you require, and also then generator standards. So lots and lots of renewables are connecting to our network at the moment. How do we make sure that they can cohabit together well? And are there things that we can do now which will provide us value in the future? And if we do it now, there's little cost compared to trying to retrofit them in the future. System planning, so that's in particular looking at that kind of national grid plan. So how do we participate at that level to make sure that we get the best overall outcome across Australia? In working closely with AEMO in that space. Summer preparedness, so again making sure that very much in the short term, but make sure that lights stay on. So that's very much of paramount importance to customer and consumers. You saw the backlash that happened in South Australia, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen in Queensland. So what are the things we've got to do in that space? And bringing back Swan Bank E is one of a number of things that we're looking to make sure we're prepared for summer. Supporting renewable development. So how do we bring online all these renewables in the most cost-effective way? So as a way of actually sharing some of that infrastructure rather than having lots and lots of small connections, but have one larger connection which we share. Customer interests. So again, all the reviews have got that focus on that customer, and it's again, how do we work with them to integrate that new technologies, that demand response, and other things like that with the existing infrastructure we have to get the best outcome. The strategic plan and implementation. So once you've got the grid plan, the next thing out of that is there was a priority list of projects. So what are the projects you want to progress? There's a number of reviews looking at the RIT process and saying, hang on, is that best suited for the investments? And how do we make sure that we are putting investments in place with a least regret? It may not be optimum because the problem is so difficult you can't optimise it. or just when you think you've optimised it, something changed and the solution then changes. But how do we make sure that we get to the point with the least regrets, that we said in 5 years' time, oh, if only we'd done that. And build business resilience. It's not just about system security, but there's also physical security and cyber security. So how do you make sure that the network remains resilient to all of those things? And how do you find the optimal balance? So fundamentally, renewables are coming, and more renewables are coming onto the system. Whether it be a 28% target, a 45% target, or a 50% target by 2030, we're going to have more intermittent renewables in 10 years' time than we've got now. And then, how do you then make that work? Now, demand response. So as I say, typically we've built the generation to match the load. But as we get smarter and technology will enable it, is there ways that we can actually get the load to then follow the generation? So again, you might not get huge amounts, but you get a material amount. So how do we make that happen? Talk about generator diversity. So if sometimes the sun won't shine, or sometimes the wind won't blow. So how do we make sure you've got the right mix of solar and wind within Queensland and also in Victoria, so that you have that diversity to reduce that particular risk? Alternatively, you could look at a network solution, and you can have a network connecting Queensland and Victoria, and that provides you that diversity and manages that intermittency. So we could actually then go and build some network. Or storage. So it's coming along too as well. So if you have lots and lots of storage, then your intermittent renewables is not a problem. The challenge then is, what's the right amount of network? What's the right amount of storage? What's the right amount of demand response? And how do you get generator diversity? And that's what I want your help with today. Just a little bit more information there, talking about demand response. So the blue line is what you'd expect. That's the Queensland electricity demand used by the consumer or by industry. The red line is what's actually flowing over our network. So all of a sudden you can see, lights are provincial work. You can see where the solar PV on household roofs is taking out that quite a lot of energy and demand during the day. It's more of an evening peaking network we're now starting to get into. And then demand response. So you can see you could go from the red line down to the green. So you can move some of that evening demand back into the summer afternoon. So, but how do you orchestrate that and get it in the right places? So, but demand response certainly has a place. And there was a question in the last session about electric vehicles and batteries, and well, hang on, if we end up with 100,000 electric cars, then can we make use of those batteries at time of peak? Well, it depends on how much those batteries cost. But certainly an opportunity. You don't want to have everybody coming home from work at 5 o'clock and then hooking up their electric cars and starting to charge just at the time of peak. You'd much rather them do that at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Generator diversity. So, as I say, you could have lots and lots of solar within Queensland, but if you've got lots and lots of wind as well, then you've got that natural diversity. If you don't, at some point, some wet week in winter, you don't have as much sun in Queensland, and then what do you do? So, solar, wind, hydro. So what's that renewable mix that we want? Both, I dare say, at state level, but also nationally. And thank you, Jenny, for your slide. So Jenny's sitting over there. So I watched one of Jenny's presentations recently, and this slide really caught my attention. So it's really looking across the NEM, and you can see here's our capacity stack of our generation. Quite a lot of it coal, a little bit of gas, hydro, and all of a sudden you'll start to see wind and solar start to really add to that bar. And our demand varies between I guess a nighttime minimum and an evening peak, and that's the demand, how that varies. So you can see our capacity of generation is not too dissimilar to what the demand is. But if you step forward, looking at a scenario of this 100% renewables, all of a sudden you see, wow, how much generation capacity do you need? So maybe 3-4 times the amount of generation capacity we've currently got. Now, the energy comes from the wind and the solar, so when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing, then those guys are going flat out. But how do you balance that to make sure that you've got enough firm capacity? So, and that's when you look at things like storage. So how much storage do you need, and does that actually provide you that firm capacity, and does that provide you that natural hedge for when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? Or do you have more networks so you can transport power from Queensland down to South Australia and vice versa to provide that diversity? So certainly when I saw that, they were just saying, well, hang on, look at the capacity that you could potentially need. Now that's 100% renewables. So if you look at only 50%, it won't be as much as that, but it's still significant. Storage. So as I said, storage is already here. You looked at the cost curves that we're modelling with CSIRO back in 2013, and but 2 years later, the cost curves gone further down. There's nothing sure that it probably will fall down again. So certainly storage is, with the intermittency of renewables, not just in Australia but worldwide, there's a huge amount of interest in storage, whether that be in lithium batteries, flow batteries, pump storage, solar thermal. There's certainly a lot of activity in that storage space. The challenge for us is how much storage should we actually have on the network? What's the optimum level? And where should it be? Should it be behind the meter, or should it be next to where the generation is? These are all questions that we're grappling with. And interconnection. So as the existing generation starts to change, so in South Australia we saw closures of their synchronous generation. So one option they were looking at was an interconnector to South Australia. You can see with the closure of Hazelwood, about 1,600 megawatts earlier this year. Ever since then, the flows from Queensland through New South Wales to Victoria have been pretty much flat chat heading south. So a great outcome just now, but what happens in 5 years' time when Liddell closes down? So that's 2,000 megawatts in New South Wales, so they've already flagged that they're looking to stop production in 2022. So what happens then? So at that point, do you need to have Snowy 2 in New South Wales, or do you need an interconnector from Queensland to New South Wales to provide access to that younger coal fleet that we have in Queensland? Or is it a mix of the two? And finally, we've got a question on customer engagement. So just to try to put it into context, we're doing quite a bit of customer engagement, or have done over the last couple of years. But we thought we'd just take the opportunity to say, well, hang on, is there a better way of doing it? Are we talking to the right stakeholders? Are we talking to them at the right frequency? Are we talking about the right things? So really, really interested in your feedback in that space. So we've got the Transmission Network Forum, which we're here today. So it's an annual event. We have a customer and consumer panel where we meet with our large direct connect customers and the customer advocacy groups. We do that on a quarterly basis. We have a demand energy forecasting forum where the forecasting experts get together once a year. We've area plan discussions, so it's as different parts of our network comes back for reinvestment, and we want to get some local input on those particular parts of the network before we go and change things. So we've had a number of those sessions over the years. We do a biannual survey, which we go out to our stakeholders. And more recently, we've tried some webinars as well. So we did a webinar on pricing and also on future networks. So certainly really interested in your feedback in that space of how we can do this engagement better. So any questions you've got for me?
And look, I magically appear just when it comes up. So you'll notice Nicole's going to float around with a microphone. It's just so we make sure that we capture your audio for the camera.
Can we just get back to slide 14?
Slide 14? Which slide's that? Oh, here we go. There you go, slide 14.
That's one.
Please address your question to Jenny. She's nicely sitting there.
I just wanted to give her credit because I'm sitting next to her also. I guess just on from a comment before and also Merrin's commentary, when you look at that firm capacity down the right-hand side, I guess from anyone who's involved in planning for energy infrastructure, if we edge out our firm capacity by not getting our planning right, we'll actually need more wind and more PV because the firm capacity won't be able to meet its 100% capability. So that is just not a PowerLink challenge, but it goes to all areas of energy infrastructure planning.
No, totally agree, and that's the challenge we've got, is how do you do planning and look at the whole electricity supply chain. You've got to look at generation, you've got to look at transmission, you've got to look at distribution, and then you've got to look at what the consumer can then actually provide as well, and look at that holistically. If we just look at transmission, then we might solve the transmission problems, but we might not solve the bigger electricity supply chain problem. So it's a very, very good point. And the challenge is we've got some really good synchronous generation, so how do we make sure that we make good use of that at the appropriate times?
Thank you. Question at the back first or at the front? I'll come to you at the front.
Thank you. Andrew Richards, Energy Users Association. Under the Finkel recommendations, there seems to be two groups of people who have reliability obligations, one being you and the second one being new renewable energy generators. Do you think there's a potential, if there's not a good coordination level between those two groups, that we'll get an overbuild and therefore a lot of misspent capital? And how do you manage to make sure that doesn't happen? The last thing we want to see is a lot of stranded assets, as I'm sure you would, and so would your debt providers.
And that's the huge challenge we've got at the moment of how do we integrate the renewables now with our existing network. You can see there's people have got identified areas where they would like to have renewables, and they've got that area but they're not close to the network. So all of a sudden it's like, well, hang on, is it cost effective to build the network to those particular renewables? And then you've got people who are building renewables very close to the network, and then all of a sudden as well, hang on, how do you make sure that they can actually generate and provide through to the demand? And that's where the point that Merrin was making earlier on is that we've got to say free and open access, so everybody wants to come and connect to the transmission network. We're obligated under the rules to let people connect. So it's really, really important that we do that. But it's also really important that the people wanting to connect do so in an informed way, so they understand the potential congestion and also the market going forward. Because the last thing that they want themselves and their investors or electricity consumers per se is to have an overbuild on generation or generation in the wrong space, which you then can't get to the load.
Great, thank you. There's a question from the lady at the front.
Hi, Jenny Purdy from Adani Renewables. I guess I really like the slide too, but I kind of don't like what it says because I can see at least two challenges, and I guess it was just a comment. But firstly, the challenge of trying to finance and determine what return you're going to get from your assets, renewable assets into the future, if the total amount of renewables built is going to be so much more than even peak demand. How might we forecast the curtailment and other issues, and how much generation we're actually going to get from those assets? And I guess it comes back to the point of overinvestment. But also, when we think about the transition to those, how are we going to keep the existing synchronous generation fleet operating to firm those assets as we get to the point where on a windy sunny day there's no need for any of them to operate, but we still need them in the evenings and perhaps when the wind stops. So I guess more of a comment than a question, but I don't know if you've got thoughts on that, but it really is a challenge, I think, for the whole supply chain going forward.
Most definitely, and it's about utilisation of assets, not necessarily utilisation of network assets, but utilisation of all assets in the supply chain. So if you're only using those coal or gas synchronous generators for 2 or 3 months a year, then they have to get a return. So, and again, with that return will obviously be implications on price. So how do you make sure that we get the right balance of that so that consumers are getting a fair deal? Because if you end up running assets at 20 and 30% utilisation when they're typically running at 80% utilisation, they're not going to be as cost effective. And that's part of the challenge we've got between the driver for sustainability and the driver for cost. If you end up having to have synchronous generators as backup as insurance policy, well, you're going to have to pay an insurance premium.
And then it comes down to what does that mean for our whole economy?
Yes.
And how that all plays out. So I think there's a lot of thinking to be done in this space.
Oh, most definitely.
All right, probably got time for one more question, then I'm going to put you to work. One more question. Gentleman over there.
It's Ian Rose from EY. A few weeks ago, I was at a microgrids conference in Nuremberg, and it was run by IEEE. It's a second world conference on DC microgrids. And one of the keynote speakers said that the studies that they had done indicated that the optimum split between renewables in the grid was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 to high voltage, medium voltage, and effectively embedded generational microgrids. So I guess my question is, do you think that is a reasonable starting point for Australia, or are we going to be a different mix if we get the optimum?
I would look forward to everybody's contribution to that over the next hour. It's something that I've really been challenging myself is, where is the best place to put storage? Is it behind the meter? And you get a lot of benefits of it being behind the meter, and you can have energy backup and other benefits there, and it provides the consumer, and they can get control, and they can feel in control of their destiny, which is a great thing. The other thing is, you say, well, do you want to actually have it at the point of generation? And you can use that storage to then actually avoid constraints on your generation in particular parts of the network. And there's also there, say, somewhere in between the distribution level where you can get your economies of scale with some of the benefits you get at the behind the meter. So instead of each person having their 10 kilowatt hour battery, you can have a bunch of them within the distribution network, and then you get your economies of scale, you get your diversity, other benefits to be had there. I don't have a view yet whether the third is the right way to go. It sounds mathematically, it sounds great, it all adds up to 1, but I'm unsure at this stage.
All right, now I'm conscious of time because it's time for us to ask you some questions. So there are 3 questions that you're going to work through as a group. So before you get settled into your group, can I just get a little show of hands for a PowerLink person at each table? Excellent, fantastic. They're going to be your scribes for about the next hour or so. How it's going to work, you're going to work through each of these 3 questions individually. Then I'm going to stand up again and ask for a little recap from each of the PowerLink people, just a short one, and then you're going to move on to the next question. If by chance, when you're in the midst of some very exciting discussions, you find yourself wavering between one question to the other, by all means feel free to capture it. We don't have to be dictated to so strictly, but I will ask at a given point in time that we recap each of the 3 questions. So the 3 questions, which are behind me. Number 1, and they're all based on Stewart's presentation. What system security initiatives will deliver best value for customers? Number 2, what is the most effective way PowerLink can contribute to downward pressure on electricity prices? And number 3, which is about the engagement component, how should PowerLink inform and engage with customers to ensure the network continues to meet their future needs? Who else should PowerLink be engaging with? Which is a great question. Who else should PowerLink be engaging with in these changing circumstances? Couple of rules before I set you free, and they're very minor, very minor rules. If you arrived with someone today from the same organisation and you sat down next to them to hear Stewart's presentation, now's a really good opportunity to separate from them. So main thing, so you can hear some different voices. So it's great to hear some different perspectives as well today, and you can hear from some other people outside of your own organisation. So I strongly encourage you to do that. Second part is there's not a right or wrong answer for this. We're just keen on your thoughts. From Powerlink perspective, the reason that we have these forums is we're keen on your thoughts or ideas. So don't feel constrained that you go, oh, I'm not sure that that's the right thing, or someone else may already say that. Just assume that they haven't, because that's really important information for the guys from Powerlink to make sure that everybody has a chance to have a say. So the first question that you're going to work through and just discuss at your table, and your scribes will capture the information, is what system security initiatives will deliver best value for customers. Stewart will remain in the room. He'll flat around and answer any difficult technical questions. He loves it when I say that, that you may have. Otherwise, discuss away. I'll come back probably in about 10 minutes or so. Go for it.